Video coverage of the 27th JCT Traffic Signal Symposium is brought to you by Highways News, thanks to our sponsors AGD Intelligent Traffic Systems, Clearview Intelligence, PTV Group, Message Maker Displays, Smart Video and Sensing, SRL and TRL.
Thank you. Thanks, Jenny. So, first things first, I didn't expect to be standing up here this morning. I'm due to be here. You're stuck with me tomorrow morning as well, when I'll be doing Jenny's job straight after the gala dinner, where everybody in the audience is far more sprightly than they probably ought to be for the morning after the gala dinner. And I will repeat Darren's apologies for not being here because of the death of Her Majesty. And from a personal thought, I think, the loss of the Queen has been felt throughout our industry, because many of you will have memories of a factory visit maybe, or when she opened a control centre, or even just that you were having to change phasing of signals during a royal visit. But all the work that she did and the time she had touch points with our industry, completely remarkable. Anyway, I'm, as Jenny said, not some random bloke to fill in the slot. As well as working with Jenny for the last 5 years on ITS UK, I also do the comms for the Transport Technology Forum that Darren runs. I've also actually got the relationship between JCT and ITS UK going, which is why ITS UK is so busy now within the symposium, which is great for both parties. And the Transport Technology Forum is a joint partnership between the Department for Transport and Innovate UK to foster closer links between local authorities and government. Now, I'm not here to just read Darren's speech, because I don't think he'd written one, but secondly, it would kind of defeat the object of him not speaking, because government aren't doing anything vaguely seen as campaigning or anything like that during the morning period. So I'm going to give my own sort of personal view as to, basically the industry, as someone who's involved in and written about the projects that Darren and his team, of which I guess I'm a member, have delivered over the past few years. So my involvement in the industry, Jenny very kindly said 10 years. It's actually now 22 years that I've been in the industry. I was a fresh-faced 30-something that fell into running a radio traffic news operation and the information gathering for it after I'd spent a decade being a radio journalist and, in fact, a disc jockey. Good morning, Poptabulous. So anyway, I worked on information sources, and one of those was urban traffic control departments around the country. It was my job to visit them and make sure we could get the information and things from them. And I tell you, that was an experience, because I discovered very quickly that counties and towns and cities all had completely different approaches to traffic management. Some were cutting edge 20-odd years ago. Who remembers Romance in Southampton? Who remembers Steve George's Matisse project in the West Midlands? I was working on those really at the cutting edge, sharing information as well as managing traffic, getting that information to the public, using these things called websites back in about 2000. When you look back now, it was so inefficient, rekeying from one machine to another, having to have a separate machine, putting all the data in free text, so actually it was hopeless for machine-to-machine transmission, all those things. But at the time, it was a steep learning curve, but it was cutting edge. Now, the difference between the local authorities that I found 20 years ago was vast. Some had fully staffed UTCs with CCTV, they had Scoot, some opened all the time, some were only open at certain times. I went to one that was run by a single bloke in a bus station, sitting upstairs on his own, and he'd been doing it for years, and frankly the bloke was potty, because I think he'd sat there not talking to anybody for a whole of his working life, watching TV cameras. And I remember if I asked him, do you use Scoot? Scoot? "I don't use Scoot, I do the phasing myself." I'd offended him by doing so. I think my favourite UTC I went to, that shall remain nameless, I asked if we could call them to get traffic information from them, and they said, yes, absolutely fine in the morning, but don't bother calling in the afternoon because we all go home at 4 to beat the traffic. I'm genuinely not making that up. Other places had no traffic management at all. In fact, the company I worked for, who's, actually a couple of the people I worked with are still working there. One of them is here today. We became experts on the traffic in some counties. We were actually the source of the information that people used to understand what was going on. And that was with us gathering our data from half-hourly check calls to the police. And generally, they only cared about traffic if there was an accident or something. If the M1 was solid traffic and not moving because of sheer weight of traffic, didn't bother them. No incident. In fact, less likely people were going to crash into each other at speed. They were quite happy. We had phone calls from listeners that sometimes were real and sometimes not. We had one call once from somebody saying they were stuck on the A5. Where? Well, I'm not sure. Where are you going? My mum's. That really wasn't helping when we were trying to work out which bit of this very long road it was. We were also, and I kid you not, phoning little chefs from petrol stations, asking them to look out of the window to say what the traffic was like. That was how we gathered traffic 20 years ago. The point I'm making is that there was no real consistency between councils, and there was no real consistency between or inconsistency in how we got our traffic information. Now, I'm not here advocating standardisation of all councils doing exactly the same thing, because everyone's got different challenges and priorities, but that at least everyone knows about the solutions that they could use. Through participating on the executive committee of the Travel Information Highway, something else that some people might remember from way back in the day, I came to understand that there were pots of money that were used to fund different research projects. But at the end of it, the frustration was that you would find out something that could be particularly useful, but if you were in one town or city, was your counterpart in another town or city going to A, find out about it, B, understand it if they did find out about it, and C, have the funds to do anything and actually learn from it and use it in the future? They could well not have that money to buy it, and there was also an issue of demarcation between authorities. So one authority would do one thing, one authority would do another. I remember when we ran Highways Agency Radio that became Traffic Radio, we were only allowed to do Highways Agency roads. So if you had an incident on, say, the A127 in Essex, couldn't mention it, even though, well, basically you had to wait for the knock-on effect on the A13 to happen, which was a highways agency road, then we could talk about it, but not before. It was that sort of, not, you don't use my bit, you don't talk about my bit. We couldn't talk about trains, for example. That was all stuff that just meant it wasn't joined up. So, as an outsider, I've been told part of the problem about attaining better traffic management and less congestion, and hopefully leading to more shared or active mobility, is it's got a public good to everybody, but it's got a cost to the authority. So the value doesn't appear on anyone's balance sheet, but the delivering of better transport has the cost against somebody's budget, but no one gives credit for the benefit. There's kind of a fairy gold benefiting the economy as a whole, but it's not always easy to justify or pay for. And all this has led to inefficiencies and not necessarily getting the most out of the innovations. And that's where Darren and his Transport Technology Forum comes in, because it's a two-way communications channel so that central government can learn from local authorities and then can share best practice among all the local authorities. It can engage directly with suppliers and innovators, and it's there to further the use of technology as a solution for authorities. And then, and here's the big bit, can help secure funding to do something about it. So the TTF is more than a talking shop. It's a doing shop, if that actually exists as a phrase. I'll give you a couple of examples. One of the leading experts on ITS, I don't think he's here this year, but Andy Graham, led some TTF research on something called traffic signals in the country. He probably spoke to many of you in the course of his research. Now, what he found was that across the country, some equipment, usually inductive loops, had been damaged, meaning systems weren't working optimally. Others hadn't for years conducted a review to check whether the technology was working at all, or had they upgraded the scoop models. Now, the research spotted that while there was clearly potential to add technology, two more intersections to improve traffic flow, congestion benefits would be most effectively obtained in the short term by simply checking the effectiveness of existing equipment and fixing it when needed. Make the most of what you have before you install self-driving nuclear space hoppers, as Darren likes to talk about. Now, they also noted the lack of relevant engineering and data expertise in some local authorities, and that the skills gap needed to be urgently addressed. The advice was, make your systems fit for purpose now. That was particularly important given the changes in traffic during COVID, where we had signals operating on the basis of assumptions that we're talking of a morning and afternoon peak that simply didn't exist. And it's always tempting to look at installing new clever solutions to fix a problem on the network, when sometimes just making sure what you've already got is working as well as it can do is much quicker, cheaper, and far more effective as a solution. Now, this report gave traffic signal engineers concrete advice about what to do. And it didn't stop there, because it actually led to a justification for government to do something about it. Darren wouldn't say this if he was talking, but I can say that actually what it meant was the government put its money where its mouth is, and it initiated the Traffic Signals Challenge. Now, you don't need me to tell you about this. The £15 million that was allocated specifically to supplement existing local authority spending outside of London on the upgrade and maintenance of traffic signals and associated equipment. Now, the new money for 2021-22 was made available to local authorities to address the backlog in signals maintenance and to start to prepare technology on local roads for the challenge of connected vehicles, new mobility, and opening up data. And this was a sign of the DfT making a real difference. Its work through the TTF was instrumental in building the case for this funding, and as it worked with LCRIG, it delivered the process for councils to apply for funding. And apply they did, because just about every single one applied either themselves or through the combined authority that they were part of. So let's go through some of them. £15 million of initial funding shared out among 39 authorities who got either quarter or £500,000. Now, these aren't the same old councils that always get the funding. For example, Tees Valley spent £500,000 of a grant spent on upgrading installations that in some cases were more than 20 years old, as well as replacing in-road loops with radar detectors, and then spending some on new tech as well. What else happened? In Hull, the council has used £500,000 to refurbish ageing equipment, upgrade communications, and order 100 new controllers. It's added above-ground detection to monitor cycling. It's introduced new cycle-friendly traffic light phasing. The cash has funded investment and in understanding data and building a digital twin, which will allow the authority to target maintenance, predict burnouts, and monitor vehicular, cycle, and pedestrian patterns across the city. At this very symposium, you'll hear about Kirklees in West Yorkshire. Its £250,000 grant has been used to fund a programme of refurbishments, to replace the obsolete controller stock, and to also invest in artificial intelligence in order to help manage the existing assets. Not only that, but the next step is to follow up on all of these projects and see what effect they've had. So, working with INRIX's new signal analytics platform, launched right here at the symposium, they're going to look at traffic flows before and after the improvements and see what effect overall they've had. And this starts to make use of the massive volume of now connected vehicles giving us all the data. And so we can work on signals being fixed more effectively. I mentioned COVID earlier. The TTF, with support from the media and ITS UK, brought together data for authorities to understand traffic flows and the amount of active travel undertaken. Originally, much of that was to understand were people sticking to lockdown rules and things, but now it can be used for authorities to compare their work and their experience of travel and the new shape of traffic to understand if they need to change things. You know, the algorithms that are no longer Monday to Friday, but different every day. Darren's team is doing other practical things as well. Working with the Connected Places Catapult, it's put together the Manual for Smart Streets. Now, that's a series of user guides to help authorities understand the digitalisation of our networks. It's producing a guide for authorities to help with the installation of electric vehicle chargers. It's supporting world-leading work on in-vehicle signage and connectivity, and its working groups are delivering help related to mobility as a service, parking, and data. It's also funded a new way to identify and model signal intersections to bring signal specification and records keeping into the age of the digital twin. The digital controller interface specification brings the knowledge of experts like Mark Playdale and Peter Routledge, and will be beginning its stage 2 before Christmas. Such work will be vital to support connected and, as Andy Graham would say, big paws, autonomous vehicles. Nearly finished. To me, the positive thing that we can take away is that the DFT is actually doing something. It's supporting our industry to make the most of technical improvements. It's not telling us what to do, that's not the point of it, but it's guiding and facilitating. It always has, I guess, but not in such a transparent way and not supporting technology in the way that it is too. And this is a direct way that you can engage with government. Now, Darren's turned up and he's loitering at the back, so the next bit's a bit embarrassing because this is where I actually say something nice about him, and I hoped he'd never find out I said anything nice about him because I didn't want him to know. But Darren is the perfect person to be doing this because he's worked in local government all his career. He was highly successful in York. He was one of the people I mentioned who got all the project funding all through the years. Now, the reason Darren is so good at his job and so good for his job is that he's passionate about local government, understands the challenges local government faces. He's exactly the right person for local government and suppliers that they need at the heart of the DFT. So through all the years that I've learned about this industry and I've written about it, it's clear to me that technology can improve traffic management and indeed all transport much quicker, cheaper and more efficiently than just going down the old infrastructure approach. The positive thing now is the government gets it too. And over the next 2 days, we'll hear the latest ways we can use technology to make traffic management more effective. The good thing is that what we learn here this week, we can feed back through the TTF at its autumn update meeting in November, which is one of a number of events in the pipeline culminating in the annual conference excuse me, in the Midlands next May. Check them all on the TTF website, but first, let's, over the next 2 days, give those working groups lots of work to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. I think even Darren would agree that that was probably delivered better than Darren himself would have delivered it. When you're in the presence of a professional communicator, you feel the difference. And thank you for bringing back some lovely memories. When very early on in my time with ITS UK, we had a technical visit to Romancy HQ down on the waterside at Southampton, taken round by Andy Wren and Ken Loughlin.
They had Denby pottery mugs, I remember. They clearly were well funded because they had, not some chipped old mug that, you went in other UTCs. This was top quality stuff.
I don't remember that. I remember being blown away by the control centre aspects of it. Now I can go to visit Cubic in Teesside and watch some bloke running Sydney's traffic from an ordinary PC on an ordinary desk.
Yeah.
We've come a long way.
We have come a long way.
So, questions for Paul. And again, the great thing about Paul being a professional communicator, you can ask him about DFT policy, you can ask him about local authority strategy, you can ask him about comms.
And you won't have a clue on any of them.
And he'll answer all of it seamlessly, so please. There we go.
Thank you. Mark Pladell, sorry, again. Thank you for advising me that there's some funding coming my way, by the way. That was good news. In seriousness, could you possibly just say a few words about the place of UTMC in this picture? Because, you know, at the Bristol TTF meeting where Jackie stood up and talked about infrastructure and you know, Darren picked up on that and we saw the funding coming. And I did the sums while you were talking. It was somewhere between 40 and 60 authorities that cut up that 15 million. Which means there are somewhere about another 100 out there who would probably quite like some more. Darren. But the other area that I think does warrant revisiting would be the whole UTMC arena. And I wonder if you could just say a few words, please.
Well, there is the UTMC working group, so it's one of the 6 working groups. So that at the moment, we're waiting for the latest feedback on that, and then that can be shared and looked at. And again, rather like what Andy did with the signals funding, was that he did the report as to this is the situation, this is the benefit of doing something about it, and the signals funding money was then found. That would be a similar process, I would guess, for that you know, give the update, give the details. This is where we are with UTMC. This is what needs to be done to get maximum efficiency. This is what we need to spend on it. And as I mentioned, the good thing about the £15 million signals funding that often doesn't happen is the before and after. I talk to modelling companies and the difficulty they have of saying, right, this is what we predicted would happen, then this is what actually happened, is very difficult to do. The excellent news that we've got from the INRIX product is they can look back at what did happen beforehand. We did the improvements, this is now what is happening, and this is the benefit, and that can be used, hopefully, fingers crossed, to justify more spending in the future. We could probably look at doing a similar thing with UTMC.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you.
Any more questions for Paul? Yeah, one in the middle there.
Just here. Here we go.
Thank you. Sorry, Chris Kennett again. I just wonder whether one of the things that we've not mentioned and that perhaps has actually come out of that funding and the 15 million and the places that it was spent on is possibly the social benefits in those places that has not and may not get picked up by the sort of analysis that we would normally do and look at. So some of the sites that I'm aware of that are being refurbished as a result are in some of the most deprived parts of some of the cities that are in some of the most deprived regions. And actually there's quite possibly a really significant social benefit of actually putting pedestrian facilities into them for the first time. So I wonder whether that's anything you...
Yeah, I think that needs to be added to the list of benefits when we look at things. It's all about looking for the joined up side of things. I mean, outside there's an exhibitor, Clearview, have got their solar road studs. And the interesting thing there is they have two benefits. One is road safety and another is environmental, because obviously you're not having to generate CO2 to power them. But the people that are worried about environment aren't necessarily the people that are worried about road safety and vice versa. So it's how you get that holistic approach. So actually picking up here on societal benefits is something that we can note down and add as here are some other benefits. You can't necessarily quantify in terms of pounds, shillings and pence, but you've got the ability to sort of add, look, these are other things that you can tick against that this investment actually led to. So yeah, I think we'll note that down and make sure that's in the report.
Thank you very much. And with his usual professionalism, Paul has talked me exactly to the 30 seconds I need to wrap up this.
Okay,
so was this
thank you.
clock on the, it's
There we
internal,
go.
isn't it?
It is, yes. It's
Studio clock
hit
on
the
wall.
news,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
yeah.
So
Thank you.
please join me in thanking both Jack and Paul
Thank you.
for